So my presentation today is titled Achieving Structural Fire Compliance in Your Buildings. I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge, honestly, to cover that in 20 minutes, but I'll give it a go in about 40 slides. But before I do that, I just want to give you a quick introduction to golden thread fire delay. Hands up who knew about golden thread fire delay before this event. Right, okay, great. So it's about half and half. I can see there's some friendly faces, like Paul Riley, who definitely knew about us. But you know, obviously today it's a great opportunity for people to get to know for all the presenters here. So just a quick introduction to golden thread fire delay. Actually made up of two companies. The original company was called Fire Delay Contractors, and that's been around a long time, 25 years plus, and worked on some prestigious buildings over the years, including the Gherkin next door and Wembley Stadium and the Millennium Dome. And then, as a direct result of the Grenfell Tower fire, the owner of Fire Delay, called Sem Nishaw, who's here today, along with myself, we set up a consultancy company called Golden Thread, who focused and are focused on clients working in occupied buildings, where we're trying to help give guidance and advice on how to make their buildings fire compliant. So we added a range of new services, including management procedures in an occupied environment, and we do a lot of work. We've done a lot of work in the NHS, and we started to do a lot of work for university buildings and a range of other buildings. And then last year, the two companies were merged together, and we're now Golden Thread Fire Delay Limited. So that's just a brief introduction to who we are. Now, I want to tell you about how to achieve fire compliance in your building, but I've decided to sort of take you back quite a few years to 2015, and this is sort of trying to tell you also the story of the fire door reference document, fire door inspections in healthcare buildings, and how that came to be, because arguably what you need to make fire compliant buildings, a lot of it is contained in this document. So in 2015, I took part in an ARFO conference, and I was presenting alongside a chap called Brian Wiley, who at the time was the fire safety manager at Northumbria Healthcare. And I was actually, then I was working for Checkmate, so I've taken Checkmate's name off it in case they get upset at me mentioning their name, I'm not sure. But anyway, at the conference, Brian and I were looking at issues regarding fire compliance and compartmentation and fire doors in general. And it's fair to say that Brian was experiencing some really diabolical issues, such as the Estates Department at Northumbria putting splicing and recycling fire doors. And I love the sort of expertise required in doing that, but it's just never been fire tested, and you shouldn't be doing stuff like that. And also, Brian was telling the conference that he'd just been handed over a brand new building, and none of the doors had been delivered in a fire compliant state. And actually, I only found out last year, late last year, that they've only now resolved these issues some sort of 7 or 8 years later, which is incredible. It's always easier to get it right first time. And one of the issues was there was a lot of complacency about, and Brian was really struggling to get people to understand why they needed to have compliant fire doors. And an example of the complacency was that I attended the following year the Fire Sector Summit, and there the fire minister was basically saying that everything in the garden is rosy, and everyone was saying, fires have never been so historically low, and everybody's doing a great job. People within the industry knew that was not the case. And then, of course, the following year, something dreadful happened that we all know. And all of a sudden, the mood changed, and people started to realise that, there were major issues. And I was actually heartened to see that the Grenfell Tower fire had been a game changer, and that people were starting to change their perceptions. And the following fire sector summit, you know, everybody was saying this is a disaster that should never happen again. And you know, we need to make change. And I was heartened by that. And that was when I decided not to retire, having left Checkmate, and set up a new company, Golden Thread. The following year, as we all know, Dame Judith Hackett published a marvellous report. I think she just absolutely got it, and she sort of nailed the issues. And I was particularly interested in one of the points she made in the document, having read it cover to cover. And this particular paragraph, she said, at the heart of this required change is a shift of ownership. Those who should have been experts in best practice shouldn't be waiting to be told what to do. And it's in that context that I attended a NAFO meeting in London in October 2018. And I, rather cheekily probably, said to Mike Ralph, who was the principal fire engineer of NHS England, why is it that the NHS, which is arguably the biggest owner of fire doors in Europe, doesn't have systems for inspecting them? And Mike took it on the chin, as he's done over the years, and he said to me, why don't you join NAFO and set up a working group for writing a healthcare fire door inspection paper? So, because he said, I haven't got time to do that. We haven't even got standardised systems for risk assessment, fire risk assessment. So, you know, really good answer and a really good idea. So that's what I did. I joined NAFO and I asked for volunteers, and I got some willing volunteers. We set up a working group and we started to write a paper on how to inspect fire doors in healthcare buildings. I'm absolutely delighted that, that 5 of the 6 people there who I acknowledge and thank are with us today. I was going to say, sadly, Mike Ralph wasn't with us. He's no longer with us because he joined NHS Scotland last month. But he actually is with us because he's there laughing. So thank you, Mike, and thank you for that inspiration. So we started to write the paper. The first issue was 14 pages long and contained 5,298 words. And people were saying, blimey, that's a lot of words on how to inspect a fire door. But believe it or not, by the 10th and final issue, we'd written 34 pages of words, and there were 13,602 of them. And I know that because I typed them all with that finger, as I do. So the reason it grew so large was some marvellous peer review going on by a large number of people, you can see. And I'm delighted that about a dozen of those people are here today as well. And during the review process, some people started saying to me, there's an awful lot of pages here, and it would be really good if there could be some images and like to break it up and make it a little bit more palatable. So that was the next thing we did. We created a reference document which was signed off and issued in January 2021. And then last year, we revised it. And this is what you've got in your delegate pack. So this is the second edition. It's got even more words in it, and it's got more stuff. And if I say it myself, it's absolutely fit for purpose. And it's NFCC approved. And I believe it's now the go-to reference document for inspecting fire doors in healthcare buildings. The good news is that 90% of what's in there appertains to every fire door in the country. So if you just miss the fire code stuff, it's absolutely applicable for housing associations and university buildings and so on. So what I want to do is very, very briefly take you through the detail, because I don't want everybody reading this instead of listening to me and the other presenters. But so basically, you've got a contents page at the front. You can see it's really easy to guide your way around it. The introduction introduces you to the concept that there's 3 different types of inspections that take place. There's type 1 on a new door, where you've got the golden thread of information. There's type 2 on an existing door, where you might be struggling to identify exactly what fire containment is supposed to be given to that door. And then type 3 is for a door that's already been either type 1 or type 2 in terms of its functional ongoing maintenance. So the introduction takes you through that. It also points out the need to create a golden thread of information. Even if you haven't got one now, you can start creating one on your existing doors. Then section 1, it takes you through the procedures of how to inspect a brand new door based on BRE LPCB scheme LPS 1197. A type 2 is obviously a pragmatic inspection where you won't have this golden thread of information. It takes you through the concept of risk managing some of your doors in terms of their location and their usage and things. So it gives really practical guidance how to not necessarily comply with something like fire code or the building regulations, but how to comply with the fire safety order to ensure that things are suitable and sufficient for the location. And then a type 3, section 3 takes you to type 3 inspections and how to manage doors that have already been either type 1 or type 2 inspected. And it also looks at issues that instead of just replicating what's there, you know, consider protection to the doors and stuff like that. And it also considers whether all doors should be inspected for the same time period. You know, BS 9999 says every 6 months, but on your high usage doors, you might want to inspect them more than your low usage doors. If you're only opening a riser cupboard once a year, why do you have to inspect it every 6 months, stuff like that. I'm pleased to say that a lot of this was created by Maz, who's speaking later on. Then section 4 is all about creating a management system because obviously inspecting doors is only just part of a fire door management for your fire doors to keep them compliant. I believe that this document is really valuable and should be used because we've got a legacy of non-compliance in this country on fire doors. And what's really, really bad is when existing fire doors are replaced by fire doors to great expense, which in themselves are non-compliant. And the following few slides show examples of getting it wrong. And there's an awful lot of people who are still getting it wrong and not getting it. If you've got uneven and excessive gaps anywhere around the perimeter of the door, and especially at the threshold, clearly that's wrong. If you look at the image at the bottom, the doors in this particular hospital were being stored in a haphazard way with no sort of QA and identification. If you look at those door leaves, you'll see that they're actually a different shade. I don't think they were ever intended to go together as a double set of doors, which is obviously quite scandalous. So these are practices which are happening now. If you're having doors where there's a 30mm gap at the bottom of the frame, it's clearly not been measured right or installed right or something. Somebody's got it wrong and they shouldn't do, because if this is supposed to be a brand new 60-minute door that's not going to achieve more than 30 minutes, and there's no evidence of what it will achieve, clearly this is a major non-compliance issue. Similarly, if people are using the wrong length of screws to screw the frame into the substrate and the surrounding structure, if people are either not protecting the location with intumescent, or in this case using hinge pads and doing it to a really pathetic standard, there's loads and loads of doors that are being delivered with excessive gaps, especially at the threshold, which, as I'm sure most people here know today, should be either 8 to 10mm on a fire door or no more than 3mm if it's got smoke seal capability. So that's some really negative stuff that we're still having to fight the battle. Some good news is that there's an organisation called BIM for Housing, which, as we speak, with my help, we're looking to convert this book into a housing version. Because, as I said, 90% of it there is applicable to every fire door in the country. And it does occur to me, I know there's quite a lot here from universities today. Can you please have a hand up? Who come here from universities? Great. I mean, it would be relatively easy, Rod, to convert this into a university version. And I'd be absolutely delighted if we get some sort of conversation going around that. By the way, the version of this which is available, there is of course an electronic version and it's emailable, so we can easily give people copies of that. So moving on swiftly, because I'm running out of time, that's sort of an overview of where we are with fire doors. But clearly fire doors only represent typically 10 or 15% of the compartmentation in the building. So we all know there's issues with fire compartmentation in general and fire stopping in particular. If I had more time, I'd be asking you to look at that picture and say, what's wrong with that? I haven't, and there's a few things, and I'm sure some people can identify, but we haven't got time. I'll give you a bit of a clue, and I'll say, how about that one? Because that's the one that adjoins it. And as you can see, it's sagged because there's absolutely no mechanical fixing. There's an awful lot of fire stopping in your buildings that are probably to that standard, where people have put something in place, and people say in the industry, that looks fit for purpose, it'll be okay as long as you don't have a fire. But clearly, we need to do something about it. So you won't be surprised to hear that NARFO have now set up a working group, and as we speak, we're very close to signing off an equivalent of this, which will look very similar, but it's covering fire damper, fire stopping, and cavity barrier inspection working groups. And you'll see there's some familiar names from the previous one, and I'm delighted that Lee has joined this one. Again, once this one is created, we will be able to then adapt it to university versions, housing versions. Just want to quickly say that there's been a lot of research gone into this, and one of the things we've done, we've tested an oddball seal. We've deliberately mixed and matched different people's products because previously there was nothing in the public domain about how to repair an existing fire barrier if no one could identify the manufacturer of the product. So we've deliberately mixed and matched a load of products. I'm pleased to say that was as it was when it went into the furnace, and that was how it was at the end of the test, having achieved a 1-hour pass. So we've now got some fire door test evidence to prove that you can repair seals, providing it's done to certain procedures, which clearly, we're looking to share in this reference document. So just finishing off with a presentation and coming back to the title, how do you achieve structural fire compliance in your existing buildings? Well, first of all, you need to try and work out what level of compliance is required. If you're trying to comply with fire code or even the building regulations in some of your older buildings, chances are you're not going to do it. What you've just got to be aware of is that certainly in some of your buildings, all it has to do is comply with the fire safety order, which says that it's got to be suitable and sufficient, which allows you to risk manage your buildings. There is guidance on page 8 and 28 of the reference document. It covers it in the reference document. Regarding a coherent fire strategy, there's an awful lot of buildings out there where nobody knows where the fire lines are and where they need revising. So you need to be clear on the fire evacuation strategy of your buildings, and in particular where the fire lines are required. And that is outlined on page 29 of the reference document. You need to prioritise your higher risk buildings and critical locations in all your buildings. That's outlined on page 30 of the reference document. And as we all know, you've got to create a golden thread of information, and bearing in mind that with your existing doors, if they're assessed as potentially being suitable and sufficient for their locations, albeit they might need some remediation and adjustment, they can be third-party certified under BRE LPCB scheme LPS 1197, and that is outlined on pages 10 and 31 of the reference document. And the last thing I want to say is, above all else, you've got to have competent people working in your buildings, and that is also covered on page 10 of the reference document. Thank you very much.